17 miners walked into the Blackwater coal mine on a foggy Monday morning in April 1962. It was just another shift, just another descent into darkness. They never came back. The official story: a gas explosion. The mine collapsed. 17 lives lost. But the truth: it was sealed, buried deep with them. And for 50 years, no one dared ask why until one man opened the wrong file. What he found didn't just rewrite history. It exposed something far older, far hungrier. Before we begin, like this video if you're fascinated by mysteries buried beneath small towns, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life horror stories you were never meant to hear. Because once you know this story, you won't forget it. Danny Morrison was the kind of sheriff you'd expect in a quiet Appalachian town. Kind eyes, quiet voice, practical, not a man who chased conspiracies. But in 2012, while cleaning out a basement archive at the Mingo County Courthouse, he found something strange. A folder thick, unlabeled, covered in dust. Inside, photos from the Blackwater Mine disaster of 1962. There was just one problem: his grandfather's name was in those photos, and he had never been told his grandfather died in a mine explosion. Part 1: The Name in the Dust. Danny sat at a steel desk lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb. Around him, boxes of forgotten records, old arrest warrants, abandoned property disputes. But the file on the desk, this one stopped him cold. Blackwater Mine disaster, April 1962. 17 names, 17 miners declared dead in a gas explosion. Their bodies never recovered. Near the top, James P. Morrison, foreman, age 31, dies. Grandfather, he blinked, sat back. That couldn't be right. All his life he'd been told James died in a car accident in 1961. That's what the family said, that's what the obituary said. He even remembered the funeral. But here was official documentation from the mining company dated months later, clearly listing James Morrison as one of the dead in the mine. Danny kept reading. A handwritten note on the corner of one report read, "Cause of death unclear. Tunnel 6C sealed before investigation complete. Further analysis denied." Another page stamped with a government seal read, "Transferred to Department 11, classified." Dai's hands were shaking. He flipped through more photos. Men in coal helmets, faces smudged with soot, twisted tunnel supports, a long corridor ending at a heavy steel door marked Room 6C. No public records ever mentioned a Room 6C. No report said anything about tunnels being sealed while the miners were still inside. And yet attached to the last page was a single brass key tag engraved with one number. Part 2: The Tunnel They Buried. Danny couldn't stop staring at the key. Even back at home hours later, the brass glinted faintly in the dim light of his kitchen. It felt old, but it hadn't aged like everything else in that folder. It looked recent, like someone still used it. The tag etched with 6C stared back at him, silent and waiting. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He packed a flashlight, gloves, bolt cutters, and the key. Then he drove 30 minutes south to the edge of the forest where the Blackwater Mine used to operate. There was no sign marking the place anymore. No plaque, no warning, just a sagging fence around crumbling concrete and collapsed scaffolding. Time had tried to erase it, but Danny had studied the old blueprints. He wasn't heading for the main shaft. He was looking for a secondary tunnel, a narrow ventilation line carved into the hillside about a mile north of the original mine entrance. It had been designed as an emergency escape route, but according to records, it was sealed off shortly after the accident. The hillside was dense with brush, but he found the grate exactly where it should have been, half buried in leaves and dirt. The metal bars were rusted to dust. With a few tugs and a solid kick, they gave way. Cool air rushed out of the shaft. Stale, unmoving, it hadn't breathed in years. Danny climbed inside. The tunnel was barely wide enough to crouch through. His flashlight beam cut across old timbers, cracked ceiling braces, and dust thicker than paint. Then, just as the path curved downward, he saw it. A steel door standing at the end of a short corridor, 6C. The letters were faded but clear. He stepped closer, pulled the key from his jacket, and slid it into the lock. The mechanism turned like it had been waiting for him. The door opened with a heavy groan. Inside was a room that didn't belong underground. White walls, fluorescent lights flickered to life without a sound, a single metal table, a monitoring station in the corner, a stack of filing drawers, each labeled in clean block lettering, and silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something unfinished. On the table, 17 manila folders sat in a row, each with a name. Each name matched the list of dead miners from the 1962 disaster. Inside the first folder was a photograph. It showed a man in a coal miner's uniform sitting in the corner of this very room. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with fear. The photo was timestamped May 14, 1962, 3 weeks after the explosion. 3 weeks after he was declared dead. Dai's breath caught in his throat. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't an accident. They sealed this room on purpose. Part 3 The Surveillance Files. Danny sat on the floor of room 6C, knees bent, flashlight steady in one hand as he opened folder after folder. Each one followed the same disturbing pattern. A miner's name, a photograph taken inside the same room, notes typed on yellowing paper. Some included health logs, psychological assessments, repetitive language. Subject reports auditory hallucinations. Subject exhibiting signs of isolation trauma. Subject refuses food after 72 hours, begins vocalizing to unknown presence. They weren't rescue records. They were observations. These men hadn't died in the explosion. They'd been sealed inside, watched, recorded like lab rats. Danny opened one file labeled Richard Albright. In the photo, Richard was banging his fists against the wall, mouth open mid-scream. The note beneath it said, Day 9. Subject attempts escape. Impact causes bruising. No structural damage to 6C. Another miner, Jonathan Reese, had a single sentence in his file. Subject silent since day 6. Restraints recommended. At the bottom of the stack was a folder marked only with an X. There was no name, no age, no photo. Only one page and one sentence typed across the center. He hears it. Danny felt a chill run up his spine. The room around him, once sterile, now felt suffocating. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, and for a moment he thought he heard something just behind the walls. A knock. Soft, slow. He froze, staring at the far corner of the room. Silence returned, but the tension didn't leave his chest. Danny stood, heart racing, and stepped toward the console in the corner. It was covered in dust, but one of the reels still sat in place on the machine. The label read, Audio 6C Final Entry. He pressed play. At first only static, then a soft voice trembling. This is Foreman Morrison. It's day, I think, 22. There's no more contact from above. No more food drops. The others are gone. The door never opened again. A pause. I think I'm the last one, but it's not quiet. It never is. Something's moving in the tunnel walls. It speaks in the dark. Not English, not words, just sound that gets inside your head. The voice faltered. Then came one last line. We weren't trapped by accident. Click. The tape ended. Danny shut the machine off and stood in silence. He knew that voice. It was his grandfather's. Part 4, The Thing in the Tunnel. Danny stumbled back from the realtor console, heart pounding. Hearing his grandfather's voice had shaken him, but it was what he said that haunted him most. They weren't trapped by accident. That changed everything. He needed air, answers, a way to make sense of what he just heard. He grabbed his flashlight, the folder marked X, and climbed back through the tunnel, back toward the shaft he'd entered through, but just before reaching the entrance he stopped. There were footprints in the dust, fresh ones, and they weren't his. The prints led in the opposite direction, deeper into the mine, past room 6C, into a corridor that hadn't been marked on any map. Danny stood frozen. His light flickered. The prints looked human mostly, but the stride was wrong. Too long, the pressure in the heel too heavy. He shouldn't have followed them, but he did. The tunnel grew colder the deeper he went. The walls began to change from rough-cut rock to something smoother, almost melted. Veins of black minerals streaked through the stone like frozen lightning, and then there was a sound, a soft clicking like bones tapping together. Danny turned off his light and listened. Nothing. He crept forward, counting each step. The corridor opened into a wide chamber. The air smelled sharp metallic. At the center was a massive circular grate like a drain, and surrounding it, carved into the floor, were symbols, not letters, not numbers, just shapes, spirals, interlocking patterns, the same ones from the X folder. He was standing in the place they feared most. The thing they had tried to lock away had come from here. Dai's light flickered again. That's when he heard it, a breath right behind him. He turned fast, light shaking, heart racing. Nothing there, but something had moved. The dust on the floor had shifted. The footprints were gone, wiped clean. Danny backed away from the grate, flashlight bouncing off the strange carvings. A low hum started to build, faint at first, but it grew louder, deeper. Not a machine, not an echo, a voice not human. Something was speaking from below. He ran through the corridor, past room 6C, back into the shaft. He didn't stop until sunlight hit his face again. Danny didn't know what it was, not yet, but he knew this. It was still alive and it remembered him. Part 5, The Silence That Followed. Danny didn't speak for the rest of the day. He drove home in silence, shut the blinds, and locked the doors. The folder marked X stayed on his kitchen table. The key to room 6C never left his pocket. His wife knew something was wrong. He didn't answer her questions, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wasn't sure what to say. How do you explain that your grandfather didn't die in a mine explosion, that he was sealed in a room observed like a test subject until something else took over? And how do you admit you looked into the abyss and it looked back? Later that night, Danny called the only person he thought might know more, retired Deputy Richard Collins. He was the one who'd signed the original report from 1962, the same report that mentioned Tunnel 6C, the one that recommended a further investigation before the case was shut down. Collins picked up after one ring. "You opened it, didn't you?" Danny froze. Collins didn't wait for a reply. "I told them sealing it wouldn't work, told them 50 years wasn't long enough." "What was in there?" Danny asked. Collins sighed. "Not what, who." Then the line went dead. Danny sat staring at the silent receiver, heart pounding. He wasn't crazy. The tapes, the files, the room, it was all real, but the worst part, he still didn't know what it was, just that it was sealed for a reason, and now it wasn't. In the days that followed, strange reports began trickling in. Animals found mutilated in the hills outside town, power outages, locals saying they'd heard whispering near the forest, things moving at night. Danny drove back to the mine entrance once just to be sure. The ventilation shaft had collapsed, like the earth had swallowed it, like it had never been there. He never found the room again. The folders vanished from his kitchen table. Even the key disappeared, but the memory stayed. Not just of the miners, not just of his grandfather, but of what waited in that pit beneath room 6C. Something old, something forgotten, and something that had been listening. Some nights, Danny still wakes up at 3:17 a.m., the same time the mine supposedly collapsed all those years ago, and every time there's the same sound outside his window, not wind, not footsteps, just a breath. Low, wet, slow, waiting. If this story left you with chills, hit the like button and subscribe for more true event-inspired mysteries like this one. And ask yourself, if 17 miners were locked in with something beneath the earth, what makes you so sure it stayed?